A young policewoman led by unconscious prejudice. Unknowingly, took away an elderly woman's only chance to breathe peacefully, unaware that the woman's son was a police lieutenant, who would not let this injustice pass. How did this fateful encounter change their lives? Subscribe to the channel to uncover the conclusion of this meaningful story, and follow more inspiring tales. Don't forget to comment on where you're watching this video from on a late October afternoon. As the sun began sinking below the horizon, painting the sky a soft orange, 74-year-old Esther Johnson slowly entered her usual park. This park had long been her sanctuary, amidst the city's bustling life. Esther was more than just a passerby. She was part of the landscape, a familiar face to everyone who frequented the area. Esther's steps were gentle, deliberate but slow, savoring every moment. In her handbag she carried a few treasured items. An old pair of reading glasses, a leather-bound notebook she'd written in for years, and her inhaler, a reminder from her son Vincent, who always urged her to carry it. Esther approached her usual wooden bench, sat down and opened her notebook, turning the pages, covered with carefully written entries. For her the park was not just a place to relax, but a sanctuary where she could find herself, within the pages of her journal, preserving memories of her late husband, and the happy years with her only son. Vincent was Esther's greatest pride, a police lieutenant, with a decisive and responsible nature. Vincent's concern and love for his mother were evident in his frequent reminders. Always take your inhaler with you when you go out, especially if you're alone. Esther knew her son only wanted the best for her, and she felt reassured, knowing Vincent was always looking out for her. The park was like a green oasis, in the middle of the city, where she could breathe in the scent of fresh grass, hear birds chirping, blending with the distant hum of traffic. Tall, thick oak trees created a canopy that shaded the park from the sunlight, adding to the tranquility. On this bench amid the calm, she could observe people passing by, see families laughing, couples strolling and runners with endless energy. But Esther usually visited in the late afternoon, when the park grew quiet, letting her enjoy solitude amidst nature. Every evening she sat on the stone bench, her hand resting on her notebook, as she penned short verses, reflections on life, her late husband, and on Vincent, the sons she loved and was most proud of. For Esther these written lines were not just musings, but a way to connect with memories of loved ones, preserving beautiful moments now past. She smiled softly, recalling memories of young Vincent, always eager to help others, from carrying groceries for neighbors, to standing up for friends. Seeing Vincent become a police lieutenant, bearing the responsibility of justice, made Esther feel like the luckiest mother. Those memories warmed her heart, making the park her most cherished retreat, amid the cold and different city. Lost in thought, Esther did not notice a pair of eyes watching her from a distance, a gaze filled with both curiosity and caution. From a corner of the park, Olivia Brooks, a young 27-year-old police officer, fresh out of the academy, was on her evening patrol. This area was new to her, a place where she was still familiarizing herself with each corner, face and path. Raised in a family where caution was second nature, Olivia had been rigorously trained by her strict, former police father since childhood. "Never let your guard down, Olivia. Don't let anyone catch you off guard," he would say. His words stayed with her through her youth, and embedded deeply, becoming a guiding principle. As she entered the police force, now seeing an elderly woman sitting alone on a bench in the park, as dust settled, Olivia felt a twinge of unease. Esther's calm presence seemed almost too serene for the empty park. Her eyes lowered to her notebook. Her relaxed movement sparked an ambiguous feeling. In Olivia she observed Esther, occasionally rummaging through her bag, her hands touching each item, as if searching for something important. Every movement was slow and somewhat mysterious, driven partly by ingrained caution, and partly by the expectations of her superiors. Olivia started watching the elderly woman with growing suspicion. Reminding herself of her academy lessons, Olivia justified her response. Never ignore even the smallest detail, she thought. Dangerous people can be those you'd least expect. The pressure to prove herself in a challenging, competitive environment further motivated Olivia to be vigilant in every situation. Especially in her early days on the job. Standing at a careful distance, Olivia watched Esther without being noticed. Her eyes fixed on every movement. She saw Esther continue flipping through the notebook, sitting silently as if immersed in her own thoughts. But to Olivia each of the woman's small gestures seemed strangely ambiguous, especially as she kept rummaging through her bag, without taking anything out. The silence and stillness surrounding her only heightened Olivia's sense that something was amiss. In that moment, Olivia questioned if she was being overly suspicious, but she reminded herself, her role was to ensure community safety. And being prepared for any scenario was necessary. Though she recognized that it was only an elderly woman. The thought, maybe she's hiding something, persisted in her mind. Echoing in her head lessons from the academy made her unable to dismiss the feeling of unease. She recalled stories from senior officers, of elderly people being coerced to carry illegal items for underground organizations, solidifying her resolve not to overlook anything. Meanwhile Esther was entirely unaware of the sharp gaze fixed on her. From afar she remained still, occasionally looking up to take in her surroundings, smiling warmly at passing strangers. Her mind drifted to old memories, finding peace under the large trees without worry or fear. But Olivia couldn't see that. She didn't see an elderly woman calmly enjoying a late afternoon. Instead she saw a motionless figure, and a sequence of actions that, in her eyes, could indicate hidden danger. Finally, after watching from a distance, Olivia decided to get closer, determined to clarify her doubts. Esther sat quietly on the bench, flipping through the pages of her old notebook, occasionally smiling, as she remembered beautiful moments with her family. The park remained silent, and she was absorbed in the peaceful atmosphere, provided however. Her sense of peace began to fade, when she realized she was no longer alone. From afar, the young police officer's watchful gaze followed her, creating a slight unease in Esther. Esther recalled previous instances, where she had been looked upon with suspicion, solely because of her skin color. Those old memories lingered as a wound in her mind, a quiet pain she had never forgotten. Remembering it made her heartbeat quicken, though she reassured herself that perhaps Olivia was only doing her job. This was her park, a place where she had the right to sit peacefully and relax. She tried to ignore Olivia's gaze, focusing on her notebook, her thoughts on the verses she had carefully written, though a sense of unease rose within her. Meanwhile, Olivia was also experiencing an internal struggle. She watched Esther from afar, trying to understand why she felt suspicious of an elderly woman. She was merely sitting alone, writing and rummaging in her bag. Everything appeared normal. Yet Olivia couldn't shake the feeling. She recalled academy stories about seemingly harmless situations, hiding potential danger. The instructor's warnings echoed in her mind. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. Despite her doubts, Olivia couldn't help but feel conflicted. Was she being unfairly suspicious due to prejudice? She wondered if she was judging someone based on a superficial impression. Olivia had heard colleagues speak of instances where excessive caution led to unnecessary conflict. She tried to remind herself that sometimes suspicion could merely be a product of overprotective psychology. But then the pressure from her father's teachings and the academy's expectations prevented Olivia from dismissing her intuition. Observing Esther, Olivia saw her look around, as if searching for something, her eyes briefly displaying caution, when she noticed her gaze to Olivia. Each small movement of Esther suddenly held meaning, as if they subtly hinted at something she hadn't yet understood. Part of her wanted to let it go, to walk away and leave the elderly woman alone, but her habit of caution was deeply ingrained. Reminding herself of her duty pushed Olivia to step a few paces closer. As the distance between them narrowed, Olivia could see Esther more clearly. The elderly woman sat upright, trying to maintain composure. Though Olivia could detect some unease in her eyes, that look, though fleeting, was enough to make Olivia feel she wasn't the only one uneasy. The ambiguous feeling became clearer as Olivia thought of other situations she had learned about. Maybe she was waiting for someone, or perhaps she was hiding something. Olivia told herself she couldn't overlook it, She had to handle the situation carefully. Esther tried to ignore Olivia's presence, but the feeling of being watched kept her from relaxing. The young officer's gaze cut through her peace, stirring unpleasant memories of being treated unfairly. Esther decided to brush off her unease, telling herself she wouldn't let anyone take away her precious peace. In this park, however, when she looked up and saw Olivia still standing there, with a vigilant look, she felt frustration rise within her. Olivia, on the other hand, was experiencing conflicting emotions. She had been trained never to overlook anything suspicious. But the hesitation made her wonder. Was she acting out of prejudice? Nonetheless, her belief in her vigilance, in the pressure from her training, made her decide to approach, ready to confront the elderly woman. When Esther noticed Olivia's suspicious gaze hadn't left her, she decided to stand and gather her belongings, to leave the familiar stone bench. No longer offered the peace it once did. Feeling disturbed, she stood, adjusted her bag and started walking, hoping to leave behind the discomfort of the young officers, prying eyes. However, after only a few steps, she noticed Olivia approaching her, with a serious expression. Esther stopped, feeling both troubled and surprised. Olivia, while maintaining a polite tone, but with sharp eyes, said, "Ma'am, I need to check your bag." Stunned, Esther turned to face Olivia, feeling hurt and disappointed. She took a deep breath, trying to remain calm as she asked, "Is there a problem, officer? I was just resting and doing a little writing." Olivia's gaze remained sharp, and her tone grew more assertive. "I noticed some suspicious behavior, such as repeatedly rummaging in your bag for safety. I need to check your bag." Esther's frustration rose like a wave. Painful memories of being labeled suspicious merely because of her skin color resurfaced. In the past she had endured silently. But this time she felt something different. This was her park, where she had come every evening for decades. A place to remember her late husband, and escape the loneliness. She looked at Olivia, trying to explain. "I was just looking for my inhaler. I have asthma and need to keep it with me." But Olivia didn't seem satisfied. Ignoring Esther's explanation, the constant refrain in her mind echoed. "Never let your guard down. Don't let anyone deceive you." She recalled her training on recognizing suspicious behavior, and stories from colleagues about hiding illegal substances in everyday items. Reminding herself not to overlook anything, Olivia responded to Esther with a firm tone. "I'm sorry, but I need to make sure there's nothing dangerous." Esther felt her patience reach its limit. "I told you I'm just looking for my inhaler. I haven't done anything wrong, and I have the right to sit peacefully in this park, without being unfairly suspected." Her voice was calm but firm, signaling that she wouldn't back down easily. Although Olivia hesitated slightly, her vigilance won over her reasoning. "If you have nothing to hide, this check will be quick," she said, her tone carrying both firmness and slight tension. For Olivia, this was an opportunity to prove she wasn't neglecting her duty, and could detect any signs of danger. Esther stood firm, feeling injustice and disappointment flooding her heart. She told herself she had the right to protect her peace, and stand against such unwarranted suspicion. However, seeing Olivia's unwillingness to relent, she understood that this wouldn't end easily. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Don't you see this as baseless and insulting?" Esther said, her eyes showing both resentment and pain that Olivia didn't perceive. Seeing Esther's determined look, Olivia's resolve only strengthened. Instead of feeling any sympathy, she had heard stories of dangerous people hiding behind harmless facades, and now she told herself to fulfill her responsibility. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job," Olivia emphasized, and without holding back, she reached for Esther's bag, trying to pull it to examine it. Taken aback by this bold action, Esther held her bag tightly, trying to protect it as an inviolable possession. But her breathing began to quicken, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger. "You have no right to do that," she said, her voice raised. But immediately afterward, a sudden shortness of breath forced her to stop, gasping as she tried to control her breathing. Her hand trembled as she fumbled in her bag for her inhaler, but panic made it hard for her to grasp it firmly. Meanwhile, Olivia, absorbed in suspicion, saw Esther's distress as a sign of hiding something, Olivia's sharp and serious gaze failed to recognize that the elderly woman before her needed help, not suspicion. Esther struggled to stay calm, but her asthma was spiraling out of control. Each attempt to inhale felt like her lungs were tightening, with every breath becoming rarer and more precious. She reached into her bag, but her shaky fingers couldn't open it. To retrieve her inhaler, the situation worsened, as the lack of oxygen began blurring her vision, while Olivia remained unaware of the woman's critical condition. Olivia saw Esther's fumbling, but didn't change her stance. Instead of recognizing her need for assistance, Olivia only grew more convinced that something was amiss. The more she observed Esther's movements, the more she saw them as indicative of something dangerous. "Open your bag so I can check," Olivia demanded, her tone carrying determination and a hint of tension, as she reached out to pull the bag from Esther's hand. In that moment Esther looked at Olivia with desperation, her voice faint as she tried to say, I can't breathe, I need my inhaler." But Olivia didn't hear her, or perhaps chose to ignore it. Olivia pulled the bag away from Esther's hands firmly, causing Esther to stagger back, losing her balance, her breathing increasingly heavy and weak. Her vision grew blurry, and just as Olivia began to understand the situation, Esther felt her strength waned completely. Everything around her faded, as she sank under the weight of an invisible fear. Finally Esther collapsed to the ground, her weak hand reaching out toward the bag, but all she felt was helplessness. As her breathing remained unsteady, the world around her dimmed, while Olivia stood there, unaware of the elderly woman's dire state. Esther's fear intensified, as she felt her breath grow shorter. Her hands shook, fumbling through her bag for the inhaler she knew she needed. Her fingers brushed past familiar items, a notebook, tissues, reading glasses, but she couldn't find the inhaler. Her anxiety rose, pushing her into a state of panic. She tried to suppress the fear to keep searching, but her breathing grew so rapid she lost control. Meanwhile Olivia stood before her, still resolute and full of suspicion. She observed Esther's increasing distress, which only confirmed her instinct that this elderly woman was hiding something. Memories of cases where elderly people had been coerced into smuggling contraband flitted through Olivia's mind, strengthening her resolve to search Esther's bag. "Ma'am, I need to check your bag right now," Olivia said, her tone less polite than before, now carrying firmness and decisiveness. Esther looked at Olivia, her voice faint from broken breaths, trying to explain. "I'm just looking for my inhaler I need. I can't breathe." But Olivia didn't listen. In her mind, this was someone trying to evade and resist. Esther's panic only further reinforced her belief that the woman was hiding something. She remembered lessons from the academy, warning that sometimes the most dangerous suspects were those who looked harmless. This thought drove her not to dismiss even the slightest sign. "I'm sorry, but I'll have to take your bag," Olivia said without hesitation, reaching to snatch the bag from Esther. In response Esther held tightly to her bag. But her strength wasn't enough to stop Olivia. Esther felt a blend of despair and fear rising, as she watched her bag, the one containing her inhaler, being taken from her grasp. Olivia immediately began searching the bag, looking for what she believed to be evidence of Esther's suspicious behavior. She pulled out each item: the old worn notebook with yellow pages, reading glasses, a small tissue box, and a few personal items. Each item appeared very ordinary, but Olivia didn't stop, convinced she just needed to look a bit further, and she'd finally discover something unusual. Eventually Olivia felt a small plastic device at the bottom of the bag. Esther's inhaler. She picked it up, her eyes briefly showing hesitation, before her suspicion returned. Memories of cases where contraband was hidden in medical devices flashed clearly in Olivia's mind. She looked at Esther, her eyes full of doubt. "What is this?" Olivia asked, her tone sharp and serious, as if confronting a genuine suspect. She held the inhaler up, inspecting it from every angle, as if to find something unusual. Esther, now exhausted from lack of breath, her eyes filled with desperation. She reached out weakly, stretching toward the inhaler, her voice faint. "Please, I need to breathe." But Olivia ignored the desperation in Esther's words and gestures. In her mind every sign pointed to the elderly woman, trying to hide something. Esther's confusion, her stress and her trembling hands, all seemed to Olivia as proof of her suspicions. She recalled her colleagues' stories about smugglers hiding illegal substances in medical devices. Today Olivia felt validated in her cautious actions. For safety reasons, I'll need to hold on to this for further inspection, Olivia said, ignoring Esther's pleading look, before putting the inhaler in her own pocket. Esther felt all hope drain away. She struggled to breathe, her heart pounding, as if trying to break free from her chest. Her vision blurred, everything becoming hazy. She no longer had the strength to stand. Her legs began to wobble, and finally she collapsed to the ground. Her hand still reaching toward Olivia as a silent plea. Only when she saw Esther fall, did Olivia realize something was wrong. She took a step back, staring in shock at the elderly woman, lying motionless on the ground. Her confidence and determination vanished, replaced by confusion and fear. She looked around and saw a few passers-by, taking notice, murmuring and staring at her with anger. In an instant Olivia realized, the elderly woman wasn't the threat she had imagined. This was a woman in need of help, and her rigid, biased approach had put her in danger. Guilt began to well up inside Olivia, as she saw Esther's lips moving silently, her eyes staring blankly into space. Olivia reached into her pocket, found Esther's inhaler and knelt beside her. But it was too late. Some bystanders stepped closer, some calling for emergency services, their eyes full of silent condemnation. Olivia felt helpless and scared. She tried to place the inhaler in Esther's hand, hoping this might salvage the situation. But Esther could barely hold it herself. Every second felt like an unspoken accusation from those around her, and she was consumed by remorse and shame. Those brief seconds turned into long moments, as Olivia sat next to Esther, trying to help her breathe. Though it seemed everything had slipped beyond her control. As Esther's condition worsened, a small crowd began to gather around. Nervous whispers filled the air, as they watched the elderly woman, lying motionless on the ground, struggling desperately for breath. Some people in the crowd tried calling for emergency help, while their eyes darted critical glances at Olivia. Every murmur, every heavy stare felt like a dagger, slicing through Olivia's confidence and resolve, gnawing at her with a growing sense of guilt. At that moment Vincent Johnson, Esther's son and a police lieutenant, happened to walk by the park. He usually ended his workday with a stop here to take his mother home. Noticing the crowd gathered around his mother's usual spot, a strange feeling of uneasy struck Vincent. He quickened his steps as he pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding as he recognized the woman, lying unresponsive on the ground. As his mother, Vincent rushed to his mother's side, his eyes filled with worry and fear. As he saw Esther struggling to take shallow, labored breaths, he quickly knelt down, holding his mother's shoulder, trying to reassure her. "Mom, can you hear me? I'm here. Don't worry." Esther weakly looked up, recognizing Vincent's voice. Her eyes brightened a little, as though finding a glimmer of safety and hope. Amid the panic, Vincent held her mother's cold hand tightly, but as he looked around his gaze fell on Olivia, who was holding Esther's inhaler, her face full of regret and confusion. Vincent immediately understood what had happened. He glanced at the inhaler in Olivia's hand, his voice low but filled with restrained anger. "That's my mother's inhaler. What were you doing with it?" Olivia stammered, unable to find a reasonable explanation. In that moment all the confidence, all the justifications she thought made her actions right dissolved. She could only stand there, eyes full of remorse and alarm, realizing that her mistake had put this woman in grave danger. Vincent snatched the inhaler from Olivia's hand, turned back to her mother and helped her use it. He held Esther's hand firmly, gently bringing the inhaler to his mother's mouth, and waited. Each second felt endlessly prolonged. But slowly Esther's breathing became steadier, her chest rose and fell more naturally, and a faint color returned to her cheeks. Seeing his mother start to breathe normally, Vincent let out a sigh of relief. But the anger and disappointment within him remained strong. He slowly stood up, looking at Olivia with a piercing gaze, full of disappointment and reproach. "Do you realize what you've done? My mother nearly didn't make it, because of your irresponsible actions. Olivia looked down, unable to meet Vincent's eyes. Shame and regret engulfed her completely. She realized she had allowed prejudice, in an excessive sense of caution, to drive her actions, leading her to ignore the clear signs of a person in urgent need. She tried to speak, but any words of apology stuck in her throat, unable to come out. What were you thinking? Taking an elderly person's inhaler, while they needed it to breathe. Vincent's voice could no longer hide his outrage, each word tearing through the silence around them. This is my mother. A 74-year-old woman sitting quietly in the park, and you. A police officer treated her as if she were a criminal. Each word from Vincent felt like a blow to Olivia. She stood there, unable to look directly at Vincent or Esther. Feeling crushed by remorse. She understood that no apology would ever fully erase the damage she had caused. Her pride and bias had eroded the trust she was supposed to build with the community. After seeing Esther's breathing stabilize, Vincent turned to Olivia, his gaze filled with profound disappointment. You're a police officer. Your duty is to protect, to serve the community, not to make people endure baseless suspicion and injustice. Your prejudice almost cost my mother her life. Olivia swallowed, her eyes turning red with shame and guilt. She realized this was not merely a personal mistake, but a significant lesson in responsibility and fairness that she had yet to fully grasp. I'm very sorry, Lieutenant Johnson, Olivia whispered, her voice shaky and full of remorse. I made a serious mistake. I never thought it would go this far. Vincent said nothing more. He looked at Olivia in silence for a few seconds, then bent down, helping his mother to her feet. He gently held Esther, keeping her close, and slowly led her mother away, through the crowd that had gathered. Before leaving, Vincent glanced back at Olivia one last time, his gaze full of unspeakable disappointment. That look made Olivia feel as if her heart was being squeezed, and she knew it would take a long time, perhaps forever, to regain Vincent in the community's trust. As the mother and son left, Olivia remained standing there alone, facing the critical stares of the crowd. She felt trapped between disappointment, shame and guilt. What had just happened would leave a deep scar in her heart, a painful lesson about prejudice, responsibility and compassion that she had overlooked. Overwhelmed with guilt, Olivia watched Vincent and Esther's retreating figures, until they disappeared into the crowd. She knew that from this moment on, every time she recalled this moment, she would never forget the hurt she had caused an innocent family. The following morning, Olivia received a summons to Vincent's office, at the police station. As she walked down the long corridor, leading to her superior's office, every step felt heavy, every sound echoing in the quiet police station, reminding her of her grave mistake. Anxiety and guilt weighed on her, and she knew she would have to face the consequences of her actions. From the day before, Vincent's office door opened and Olivia stepped inside, her eyes not daring to look directly at the lieutenant. Vincent sat behind his desk, his expression serious and firm. The disappointment was clear in his eyes, and Olivia could feel the pressure from that look. Take a seat, Officer Brooks, Vincent said, his voice cold and strict. Olivia sat down, keeping her hands clasped in her lap, to restrain her nervousness. She knew she couldn't avoid this confrontation, and she was prepared to take responsibility. Vincent looked directly at Olivia, a heavy silence hanging between them. After a few seconds, Vincent spoke. I think you know why you're here today, don't you? Olivia nodded slightly, her gaze avoiding Vincent's. Yes, Lieutenant, I understand. Vincent took a deep breath, trying to contain his emotions, though he wanted to remain calm. The pain and anger were evident in his voice. Good, then tell me everything, from beginning to end, about what happened with my mother yesterday. I want to hear the entire story from you. Olivia swallowed, her throat dry. She tried to keep her voice steady as she began to speak, but every word was filled with regret. I saw your mother sitting alone in the park, and at that moment I felt that something was off about her. I saw her rummaging through her bag and I let my suspicion take control. So just because an elderly woman was sitting alone In a park and searching her own bag. You thought she deserved suspicion? Vincent asked, his voice tense but calm. Each word sharp. Olivia raised her head, meeting Vincent's icy gaze, and immediately felt a wave of shame wash over her. I was wrong, Lieutenant. I let myself be led by prejudice and excessive caution. I thought I was protecting the community. But I allowed irrational feelings to dictate my actions. Vincent looked at Olivia, his eyes filled with deep disappointment. You thought taking an elderly woman's inhaler, as she struggled to breathe, was protecting the community. Officer Brooks. Olivia lowered her head, the weight of guilt pressing down on her. No, I was wrong. I didn't consider her health. I was so focused on my suspicion that I ignored the obvious signs. Vincent remained silent for a moment, his gaze a mix of disappointment and coldness. Do you know what angers me the most? He asked, his tone quiet but forceful. It's that you treated my mother, an innocent elderly citizen, as if she were a threat. You let prejudice guide you, and completely disregarded her dignity. Vincent's words toward Olivia's heart. She couldn't argue back or make excuses. She knew she had failed not only as an officer, but also as a human being. I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I have no excuse for my actions, Olivia said, her voice trembling. I know an apology won't change what I did, but I am truly remorseful. Vincent looked at Olivia, letting the silence emphasize the seriousness of the situation. Do you think an apology is enough, Officer Brooks? Olivia raised her head, her eyes reflecting deep regret. I know it's not enough. I'm willing to take responsibility, and I hope for a chance to make amends. Vincent sighed, his gaze softening slightly but remaining resolute. Olivia, you've lost my trust and that of the community. Every action you take reflects directly on the image of the force you represent. Not just me, but every citizen deserves fairness and respect from those entrusted to protect them. He paused, then continued, his voice firm. You will be required to participate in training on bias and conflict management. This won't be a brief session, but an intensive program to help you better understand your role with the community. Additionally, you will engage in community service to interact with the residents and learn the proper way to serve. Olivia was stunned but felt a flicker of hope. This was her chance to right her wrongs, to learn and grow. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she was ready for it. I understand, Lieutenant. I'll follow every instruction you've given, Olivia said, her eyes filled with determination. I won't disappoint you again. Vincent looked at Olivia, still stern, but with a hint of gentleness in his gaze. Good, I hope you learned something from this incident. You caused harm to my mother, and damaged the trust people had in you. Don't forget, Olivia, as a police officer, you must prioritize compassion and fairness above all. There is no room for prejudice in this job. Olivia nodded, her eyes red from remorse. I understand, I'll remember that. Vincent held his gaze on Olivia for a few more seconds, then gave a slight nod. You may go, Officer Brooks. Start your path to redemption from now. Olivia stood, bowing respectfully. Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll do my best. As Olivia walked out of the office, she felt the weight in her heart start to lift slightly. She knew the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but she would never forget the lesson from today. She resolved that from this day forward, she would be a better police officer, a better person, someone who knows how to respect, protect, and serve her community with fairness and empathy. A few weeks after her confrontation with Lieutenant Vincent, Olivia began a bias and conflict management training program. Each day she attended classes and participated in activities that challenged her to confront her own biases and understand the harm they could cause. This training wasn't just theoretical. It included numerous practical exercises, requiring Olivia to reflect deeply on how biases and excessive vigilance had once influenced her actions. These lessons became increasingly challenging, as Olivia realized there were things she'd never truly understood or examined deeply, and one essential part of the training was group discussions, where she and her colleagues would listen to and share real-life stories of discrimination and prejudice. they had either witnessed, or even contributed to one particular session, left a lasting impression on Olivia. When a local resident recounted an incident of being unfairly suspected and treated by the police for no other reason than their appearance, the person spoke about the feeling of devaluation and mistreatment, a sentiment Esther had experienced. Hearing these stories felt personal to Olivia, as though each word struck directly at her. She began to grasp more profoundly that suspicion and fear not only harm the victim, but also weaken the relationship between the police force and the community they serve. She also realized that a police officer's duty goes beyond maintaining order. It includes protecting and respecting everyone's rights and safety. Outside of training, Olivia was required to participate in community activities at the local center here. She met people she might have overlooked before, or held unconscious biases against. Working alongside them, listening to their life stories, challenges and hopes, things she had never taken the time to understand before, brought a new perspective. One day she met Mrs. Harris, a retired teacher and one of the longest-standing residents of the neighborhood. Mrs. Harris had once been unfairly suspected by the police because of her skin color. While shopping one evening, she shared that it was the first time in her life she felt disrespected and treated as a suspect in the community she had called home for decades. Listening to this story, Olivia couldn't help but remember the helpless, despairing look on Esther's face in the park. For the first time, she truly understood that small actions, which she once considered harmless, could leave profound wounds on others. The community activities also introduced Olivia to a group of teens in the neighborhood who remained wary around police officers. To them, Olivia was just another officer they found hard to trust initially. Conversations between them were filled with hesitation and avoidance, yet Olivia was patient, listening and openly sharing her journey, recounting her mistakes, and explaining why she was there to learn how to become a better officer. Olivia's story prompted some of the teens to open up, sharing their experiences and fears about living in a place where the relationship between the community and the police was often strained. One young man in particular, Marcus, dreamed of becoming a police officer, but feared he would be viewed as a suspect just for wearing the uniform. He told Olivia, "I want to make a difference, but I'm afraid I'll be seen as guilty, even when I just want to help." Marcus's words stayed with Olivia, reminding her of herself when she had first joined the force, and she realized her responsibility to convey a positive message to the next generation of police officers. Olivia also took part in a community art project, where she and the neighborhood teens painted a large mural together. The mural symbolized unity, respect and hope for a community free from prejudice. Olivia contributed her small part, painting, with the hope that this would mark a new beginning. Watching the mural come together, Olivia felt as though she herself was being renewed, leaving behind the prejudices and pride that had once guided her. Instead, she carried with her a new commitment to her role within the community. As they neared the mural's completion, Olivia spotted a familiar figure in the distance. Esther stood silently gazing at the mural. When she noticed Olivia, her expression softened. Without hesitation, Olivia approached, her eyes filled with respect and gratitude. She bowed her head slightly and said, "Hello, Mrs. Esther. I'm truly sorry for everything that happened." Esther was silent for a moment, then replied softly, "You hurt me a lot, Olivia. But I see that you're trying to change." Her gaze was gentle, not angry, but still firm, reminding Olivia that forgiveness is not easily granted. It must be earned through sincere actions and true remorse. They stood together for a moment in silence, watching the mural come to life. Olivia felt a quiet forgiveness and a determination within herself, never to repeat her mistakes. She understood that the path to redemption would not be easy, but she was willing to walk it step by step, to become an officer the community could trust. Months passed since that day, and Olivia continued to participate in community activities, gaining a deeper understanding of her responsibility to the neighborhood she served. The lessons at the community center and her conversations with residents changed her. Bit by bit, she was no longer the young officer, driven by instinct and fear. but someone who placed herself in others' shoes. And understood that respect and listening were essential to her role. One crisp autumn afternoon, Olivia returned to the familiar park to join a special community project. Police officers, local residents, and neighborhood teens gathered to paint a new mural, together a symbol of unity and mutual respect. They chose a large wall in the park, where many people pass by, to create a mural that symbolized connection and hope for the community. Olivia worked alongside the teens she had gotten to know over the past few months, including Marcus, the young man with dreams of becoming a police officer. Marcus no longer appeared as wary as before. Instead, his eyes shone with confidence and determination. He looked at Olivia and shared, "I believe we can do great things. Thank you for helping me see that being an officer isn't just a job, but a responsibility to everyone around us." Olivia smiled, feeling proud and relieved to see her positive influence on the next generation. Together, they painted images that symbolize the community. Families, elders, children, and even figures in uniform, standing alongside residents, all creating a scene of peace and safety. While busy with the mural, Olivia noticed a familiar figure in the distance. Esther, who had profoundly impacted her life since that day in the park. Esther watched from afar, a gentle smile on her face, as she saw the mural and everyone working together. Her gaze lingered on Olivia, as if to remind her of the past, but also carrying a warmth of forgiveness. Without hesitation, Olivia put down her brush and walked toward Esther. When she approached, she bowed her head slightly and said, "Thank you for coming today, Mrs. Esther." Esther smiled, her eyes calm and profound. "You've come a long way, Olivia. Seeing you here today, I can feel the change." Looking into her eyes, Olivia felt comforted by those words. "Thanks to you and to everyone. I learned a lesson I should have known long ago. You gave me a chance to make things right, and I'll never forget that." Esther nodded, her smile warm and kind. "We all make mistakes. What matters is that we recognize them and work to correct them. You've done that, Olivia. You've shown that you can change, and that means a lot to me, into this community." Olivia felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She was no longer just an officer, performing her duties without considering the consequences. She now understood that every action had an impact on the community she served. Before leaving, Esther turned back and gently added, "Remember, your job isn't just to keep order. It's to build trust. We believe in you, Olivia. Don't ever forget that." They exchanged a warm look, and then Mrs. Esther walked away slowly, leaving Olivia filled with deep gratitude. Watching her go, Olivia vowed this was not a goodbye, but a reminder of her commitment. At sunset, as the last rays of the day dipped below the horizon, Olivia rejoined her friends and colleagues to continue working on the mural. The mural was not just a piece of art, but a symbol of unity, forgiveness, and the transformation Olivia had experienced. The bright colors on the wall glowed in the twilight, a lasting reminder that everyone in the community deserves respect, to be heard and to be protected, regardless of skin color or circumstance. For Olivia, it was a promise that would remain in her heart, a beacon guiding her toward becoming a compassionate, fair officer who always prioritized the safety and trust of the community. From afar, Esther looked back at the completed mural, her eyes soft and hopeful. She knew that not only Olivia, but the entire community had come together, overcoming a challenging time, to look toward a brighter future. When the mural was complete, it wasn't just a work of art, but a symbol of compassion, empathy, and the power of unity. The story of Esther, Olivia, in the entire community, taught the importance of compassion, and the responsibility each of us holds, to build a fair and respectful society. Each person has the capacity to change, and contribute to the good of their community. And sometimes a small act, a sincere apology, can lead to significant change. Through this story, we understand that prejudice and suspicion only drive us apart, while understanding and kindness bring us together and build strong trust. Let's all strive to create a world where everyone is seen with respect and trust. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to our channel to enjoy more stories like this. Stories that inspire and remind us of the beautiful human values we share. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to sharing more stories with you.